Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a psychological trap that almost all of us fall into at some point. It's this profound tendency we have to slowly, almost invisibly, lose sight of our deepest, most genuine desires whenever we face prolonged hardship. It is quite literally a journey from fervent hope down to mere survival, and we're going to trace exactly how that happens. So, let's dive into this with a pretty humorous, highly relatable, everyday scenario. Picture this. You just got home from a long, exhausting day at work. You walk through the door, drop your keys, and your spouse asks you the ultimate, deceptively simple question. What do you want for dinner? And of course, you give the classic, universal response, right? Anything. So they whip up a nice stew with whatever's in the kitchen. But when you sit down to eat, your spoon is just kind of hovering. Something's off. When pressed on what you actually wanted, it suddenly hits you and you blurt out, "Spicy pork." Why didn't you just say that in the first place? Well, because you honestly didn't know at first. Actually seeing the stew made you realize what you were really craving. It perfectly illustrates our core problem today. We are so often totally disconnected from our own minds. We just don't know what we truly want. Taking this a step deeper, our source material looks at some fascinating historical and biblical case studies. It points out that coming face to face with profound spiritual truth is actually a lot like looking into a mirror. It doesn't just show you the divine, it reflects your own inner state right back at you, forcing you to confront this exact, penetrating question. What do you want me to do for you? The text sets up a really sharp contrast here, using two different people who faced versions of this exact question. On one hand, you've got Bartimaeus, a blind man who instantly, passionately knew he wanted his sight back. No hesitation. But on the other hand, you have a man who couldn't walk, begging at the temple gates. For him, prolonged suffering had fundamentally rewired his desires. Think about it. If you asked this man at the temple gate what he truly wanted, he wouldn't ask for working legs. The harsh reality of his daily grind had totally downgraded his dreams. A miracle wasn't even on his radar anymore. He would just ask for a few coins to buy some bread for that day. He had completely traded the hope of healing for mere survival. And that brings us to the central climax of our analysis, the Pool of Bethesda. Now, when we hear about this biblical spot, we usually picture a serene, peaceful sanctuary for the sick, right? But the text completely reframes this. This was definitely not a peaceful spa. Thanks to the tough social and economic realities of the ancient world, it was basically a harsh, unforgiving encampment for the chronically ill and disabled. Let's break down just how ruthless this environment really was. There was this local legend that an angel would occasionally stir the pool's waters, and the absolute first person to get in would be instantly cured. So imagine the dynamic that creates. Any initial hope of healing quickly dissolved into a desperate, cutthroat competition. This wasn't a supportive community, you know? It was a literal survival battlefield where the sick had to step right over each other just to reach the water first. Now, here is where it gets really heavy. The text zeroes in on one specific man at this pool and the staggering duration of his suffering. 38 years. Just let that sink in for a second. This man had been an invalid for nearly 4 decades. Imagine sitting on the very edge of a miracle for your entire adult life, only to watch stronger, faster people trample over you to steal your chance year after relentless year. And in that era, an incurable illness over 38 years didn't just break your body, it completely annihilated your life. The text explains that being sick for this long meant total financial ruin. Society slapped a sinner label on you. Friends and family, they eventually had to abandon you just to survive themselves. This man was left in absolute, devastating social and economic isolation. So right into this scene of utter brokenness, Jesus walks up to this incredibly isolated man and asks a question that, on the surface, sounds almost absurd. He asks, "Do you want to get well?" I mean, why ask a starving person if they want food, right? Why ask a man paralyzed for 38 years if he wants to be healed? Well, to understand why he asked it, look at how the man actually responds. He doesn't say yes, and he doesn't say no. He totally dodges a direct answer. Instead, he just rattles off this deeply ingrained practice list of excuses. He says, "I have no one to help me into the pool. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And honestly, this perfectly captures the absolute tragedy of his mental state. 38 years of relentless trauma hadn't just destroyed his physical health, it had completely wiped out his ability to even voice his true desire. Instead of expressing a desperate hope to be healed, he'd become a master at explaining exactly why his healing was impossible. His true hope was just buried under decades of logic and defeat. But here's the absolute brilliance of this interaction. That question, do you want to get well, wasn't asked because Jesus needed information. It was a highly targeted psychological tool. It was specifically designed to bypass the man's hardened survival instincts, slice right through all those logical excuses, and literally drag that original, buried hope, the whole reason he even came to the pool in the first place, right back to the surface. And then we hit the climax of the narrative. Jesus doesn't debate the man's excuses. He doesn't even wait for the guy to muster up some perfect declaration of faith. He just recognizes that fragile, deeply buried desire and commands healing straight to it. He simply says, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And just like that, the man is fundamentally restored. So what does this ancient text mean for us right now? Well, the source traces this exact psychological progression in modern life. We all start with these fervent, genuine desires for our lives, our relationships, our spiritual growth. But then, life happens. We face repeated disappointments, prayers that feel completely ignored, endless struggles. And slowly, without even realizing it, we downgrade those massive hopes into mere survival tactics. We stop asking for transformation, and we just ask to make it through Friday. Just like that man at the pool, we've developed our very own modern Bethesda excuses. We tell ourselves things like, well, I just don't have enough time right now, or my situation is way too complicated, or the absolute classic, I tried that before and it didn't work. We have become experts at crafting incredibly logical excuses for our own spiritual complacency. But the core message of our source material pushes back hard against this survival mindset. Pulling from John 10:10, it emphasizes that true spiritual intervention is never just about getting enough strength to barely survive another stressful day. It's about fundamental, abundant restoration. It's about a total transformation of your life, not just surviving the battlefield. Which brings us to the final and really the most crucial point of this explainer. The question asked at the Pool of Bethesda isn't just some historical footnote. It's a provocative, deeply personal reflection for every single one of us today. So I want you to look past your daily survival routines. Look past your perfectly logical excuses. Deep down, beneath all of that, do you want to get well? What is your true hope? Think on that. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.